I'd like for us to begin, if we could, please. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're glad that you are here. If we could begin, I don't want to waste a second of our time this morning. I just mentioned to Barbara that ordinarily people don't come early to the adult forum at 10 o'clock, or do we have this kind of crowd? And she says there's something about the magic of Notre Dame that brings people together. I think it's that, and it's also the magic of Barbara Bain. We're glad to have you back. Thank you. Told him I'm already devising ways to have her back again. Today is, at St. Paul's, we celebrate the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul. It is our paternal feast day, as it were. It's also the day of our annual La Trobe Lecture. Our La Trobe treasure is now over 200 years old, and it is the St. Paul's Foundation that takes care of this wonderful treasure and all of our historic buildings and properties, and they are our sponsor today. So I want to introduce Tim Velovitz, who tell us a bit about the St. Paul's Foundation. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Arn. Good morning, everybody. I'm Tim Velovitz. I serve as the Secretary of the St. Paul's Foundation, and I'm standing in for John Siegel, who's the president of the foundation, who couldn't be with us this morning. On behalf of the foundation, I'd like to welcome everybody to this year's annual La Trobe Lecture, and thank you for attending. I'd like to thank the members of the Board of Trustees. We meet quarterly to discuss, monitor, and direct the activities of the foundation. In addition to me, the foundation is governed by officers John Siegel, who is, as I mentioned, our president, Joe Thomas, our treasurer, and is overseen by trustees Tim Adams, John Kepler, Sarah Knutson, Catherine Murphy, and Don Stump. Larry Campbell serves as our vestry liaison, and Mariah Halloran is our parish liaison. At St. Paul's, there was a vestry discussion paper a number of years ago, back in January of 1992, which stated, "It is clear that in order to be good stewards of St. Paul's Church and its Christian ministries, we must begin to plan for the mobilization over the long term of additional resources." So with this idea and only $6,500, the vestry of St. Paul's created the St. Paul's Foundation. And the purpose was to financially support maintenance and restoration projects for the buildings and grounds of the parish. The hope was that with additional resources funding ongoing maintenance, funds in the operating budget would be used directly to support the mission and ministry of St. Paul's itself. So 32 years later, the endowment that the foundation oversees stands at just over $7.3 million, including the main endowment, which is valued at a little over $5 million, and the Simmons bequest, which is valued at a little over $2 million. Each year, the foundation devotes 4.5% of the average portfolio value to the ongoing work of the parish. With the addition of the Simmons Fund back in September of 2022, proceeds from the foundation now support not only ongoing maintenance, but also the Lazarus Ministry, the Music Ministry, scholarships to St. Paul's Episcopal Preschool, and the Cemetery Fund. Foundation Sunday is a day to recognize the work of the foundation and to remember that without the vision and careful planning of those that came before us, none of this would be possible. We want to especially remember and thank those members of the Covenant Circle, those who have remembered St. Paul's in their estate planning. In 2013, the foundation received a bequest from Hilda Soper, valued at around $2.7 million. And this generous gift bolstered the endowment, setting the foundation on a new path to becoming the financial backbone of the parish. We encourage everyone to consider becoming a member of the Covenant Society, and you can find out more information about that on our website. With that, I want to thank everyone again for coming this morning and turn it back over to Orrin.
Thank you, Tim. All of you have read Barbara's impressive resume, and that's gotten you here today. Some of you have traveled as a fellow pilgrim with Barbara. We know her as a longtime friend of the parish. I, again, don't want to waste a second. I bring you Dr. Barbara Drake Bain.
Oh my goodness, it's such a pleasure to be with all of you. fellow pilgrims, I have about, well, a little over half an hour to talk to you about one of the greatest buildings in the world. My nephew, some years ago after college, went to Paris and came back and bragged to me, to my horror, that he had done something called the 7-minute Louvre. And now I have the 30-minute Notre Dame. So I'm not quite sure how to handle that, but I'm going to do my best. Some of you have been with me in Jerusalem, and for lecturing in Jerusalem, both at St. George's and later for a lecture for the Smithsonian Associates, I did a lecture called Falling in Love with the Holy Sepulchre. Because the first time I ever went to Jerusalem, someone who had been there before me said, I just need you to know you're going to hate the Holy Sepulchre. But that didn't turn out to be the case. But you do kind of have to make the case for the Holy Sepulchre. And when you see a picture like this from the Holy Fire ceremony, you know there is a certain amount of chaos, and you understand that it may not be that easy at first glance to fall in love with the Holy Sepulchre. But that has never been true of Notre Dame de Paris. I was never given that kind of advice for this amazing building, which was begun in 1163, the current building, right? There were earlier buildings before that. From its very beginning, it's been a thing of romance. There's just no getting around it. This is a wonderful early view by Fouquet. It happens to be in the Lehman collection at the Met, from a prayer book representing pilgrims praying before the outside the gates, just at the very site from a distance of the great cathedral. And all of you will remember pain with great pain, April 15th, 2019, when I sat in my office at the cloisters weeping and was on email with all my colleagues in Paris. Meanwhile, I was getting calls from the AP and the UPI asking for statements. What can we say about this place? And words really failed, especially when the drama of the spire coming down. But there were incredible moments too, incredible moments like this sweet little boat, this sweet little fire boat, which is sort of like what was that thing when you were little, the Tuggy the Tugboat, right? This is the Tuggy the Tugboat of the fire at Notre Dame, which pumped gallons and gallons out of the Seine, and many say that it's actually the river that saved the cathedral. I remember well the moment when I got the phone call from one of my colleagues in Paris. I was staying in my office till I heard more, and she said, they say it will be saved, and because it really was that close. And when you see this picture of people kneeling outside Notre Dame, it's exactly the same thing, right? It's a 2019 image versus the image from the 1450s. This is an eternal thing, Notre Dame. There were very funny survivors of the fire, and some profound survivors of the fire. My favorite is the goofy rooster from the very top of the flesh, of the very top of the spire, who took flight and was found several days later, and has now been put on exhibition, and he's a kind of a mascot, if you will, of the survivor of the fire. But there are also profound survivors, things that are almost inconceivable. This view with all of the charred timbers that have fallen down, and yet this sculpture, amazing sculpture, both of which we'll talk about in due course. Because what I wanted to do today, and I think Oren told you I was going to talk to you about the restoration, but I really want to talk to you about the treasures that you might not have in your mind, and that you can't, things about Notre Dame that you won't see in other programs where they're inside watching the guys put up the new beams and stuff. I can't do that. But what I can, I think, hope to do is to talk to you about some things that you will see when you are next, whenever that may be, inside Notre Dame. Several people have asked me, do I know? And yes, it's reopening on December 8th. Last year, I was with a colleague in Paris, and she said, well, it's going to be sometime in 2024. I said, well, it's either going to be August 15th or December 8th. And she said, well, why do you say that? I said, well, it's either going to be the Assumption or the Immaculate Conception. And probably it'll be December 8th because it gives them longer. Sure enough, she's Catholic. I'm not. She was amazed. Anyway, it will reopen on December 8th. I think my husband is a builder, so I'm sure there's going to be a lengthy punch list still in place, but it will open. So this is the earliest view of the interior of Notre Dame from about 1420. This belongs, unfortunately, to the Getty and not the Met, but it's a great image. And it shows a Pentecost scene. Pentecost scenes are always inevitably very boring images in the history of art, except every once in a while when they show you an interesting interior. I always say that most Pentecosts look like a vestry meeting, you know. But here, I like to think of this, and I'm going to have this, you sort of adopt this. This is the people of St. Paul's on the first visit to Notre Dame sometime in the future. So what do I want you guys to be aware of when you next go? This is obvious, right? Incredibly, I get chills just thinking about it. The three great roses survived this fire. I was sure that was impossible, right? Because the lead is so soft and the lead is going to melt and that's it. No, all three roses survived. The one that has the most medieval stained glass is, in fact, the North Rose. I'm sorry, this is the West Rose. And it has the most medieval glass of the three. The most extensively restored is the South Rose, which was given by Saint Louis. And they've had trouble with preserving it. There have been restoration on that since the 1600s or so. But the great thing about a rose is at a distance, you don't perceive what's replacement glass from the 13th century or 19th century, or what's original. And then, of course, the third being in the north transept. That's the only medieval stained glass in the cathedral. Well, why is that? There was a replacement campaign that they began, an ill-advised, but not unique to Notre Dame, replacement campaign. They thought, well, we really need to put a lot of clear glass in so people can see better. And this started in 1741. And so it was quite systematic, but the roses were too difficult, so the roses remained. You see it here in an 1807 engraving. This engraving was done as they were preparing for the coronation of Napoleon inside the cathedral, but you see how the church interior is flooded with light. So you can't really go to Notre Dame looking for medieval glass. And what I want you to think about instead are all of the works of art, the masterpieces, as this says, that are inside, that pepper the space of the cathedral. So if you look on this diagram, you see all of those little blue arrows. They all correspond to great works of art that are there that you might not necessarily be so aware of, including extraordinary things that have survived the fire. So that's kind of what I'd like you to think about in preparation for your next trip. This Virgin and Child of the mid-14th century is extraordinary. She was in that image I showed you before with the charred embers lying in front of her. She was actually not originally inside the cathedral. She was on the exterior of an adjacent building, but she was brought inside in the 19th century. And very often now when people speak of the Virgin of Notre Dame, they're actually often speaking of this particular image of the Virgin and Child, which is classic 14th century piece. What happens in the 14th century is the child gets squirmy like real babies do. And sometimes, you might see the child grabbing the mother's chin or pulling at her veil. This child is doing pretty well. He's just gently grabbed hold of part of her robe, and she seems to be completely undisturbed by it all. When I was in graduate school, actually undergraduate even, they used to talk all the men professors. They would talk about how in the 14th century, oh, you know, they started to show the image of the Virgin and Child in a hip-shod position. And they thought that this was, you know, it was all because they wanted to show movement. And, you know, years later when I had a baby, it was like, not is hip-shod position, that's how you hold a baby. This is nothing to do with, anyway, but that is very much true in 14th century imagery, and you get these wonderful lines as the Virgin struggles to hold a slightly feisty baby Jesus. There's an amazing frieze that forms part of the border, let's say, at the entrance to the choir. It's been repainted in the 19th century, so it's pretty dramatic in terms of its color. And I love this image of the Magi. Do you see the two, the one who's kneeling, he's busy now interacting with the Virgin and Child. But the other two are kind of having a sidebar conversation. Like that angel with a star is still up there. And you see that they're gifts. I'm sure this is a 19th century notion. It looks like that Mackenzie Childs kitchenware, checks, right? And they're busy, they're busy chatting. And the child is a little skeptical. He's kind of pulling back. Who is this guy? Showing there are wonderful anecdotal details in this. And you see Joseph is off at the side, not too sure about these strange people from the East either, right? And it goes on quite a ways. There's this magnificent entry into Jerusalem, which I think, we have to talk about this later, but I think it's next to a marriage at Cana, which is a kind of odd to me, but I think that's what's going on at the left-hand side here. So just to give you a position, a sense of where these pieces are positioned, and I apologize for this image, but look, they're walking right by it. Nobody's looking. I don't want that to happen when you go. Okay, all right? And I saw pictures earlier when they're farther down that they never looked. So it's okay. We saw amidst the fallen timbers this amazing, amazing work of art. And I wanted to talk to you about it a little bit because I suspect that this might not be entirely consistent with Episcopalian taste in Northern Virginia, right? This is a very dramatic French Baroque sculpture. It's known as the vow of Louis XIII. It is in fulfillment of the vow that Louis XIII made, putting France itself under the protection of the Virgin Mary. I mean, there was a government decree when he did this, right? I am putting France under the protection of the Virgin, and represented that then in this sculptural ensemble, which was begun, the vow was taken in 1638. This ensemble was not completed until between 1708 and 1715. But this very dramatic appearance of the Virgin with the dead Christ in her lap, basically almost falling out of her lap. And you see that angel on the right-hand side, but kicking up a leg, there's a lot of instability in this picture. It's very much like an image of someone who's just been killed, right? The way that the Virgin's hands are going out, there's this expression of horror and grief, just stunned by this event, which is, I know you have in your mind's eye what Michelangelo's Pietà looks like. Nothing to do with that, right? This is a great Baroque representation of the drama of the moment. And what you have then on the right are the image of Louis XIII having made the vow. Oh, sorry, he's on the right, yes, offering up the crown, and Louis XIV on the left in fulfillment of the vow. Beautiful, beautiful stone. Look at this detail of the angel. So I want you to like this, even if it's not what you think your taste is. It's really amazing, right? Here are the kings. Okay, they're pretty goofy looking, right? Look at those curls on the left hand. But then look at this. Look at the subtlety of his hand as he brings his hand over in a kind of modesty and devotion, and touches his own fur cloak, right? And the details that they can get out of that. All right, well, in honor of today, How could I not talk to you about this? This is part of an ensemble that are known in French as les Mets, the paintings that were given every year, beginning in 1630 and carrying through till 1707, by the Goldsmiths Guild of Paris. Now, truth be told, when they started this ambitious program, they actually started much before that, and they initially gave Goldsmiths' work, wonderful, no longer existing, precious gifts to the cathedral. And at some point, they decided to switch over to these paintings, and I think they were probably a lot less expensive, believe it or not. But these then are these fabulous paintings, which before the fire are in the south aisle of the cathedral as you come in on your right-hand side. This one, the Conversion of St. Paul, from May of 1637. Can you make out the figure of the horse who's toppled over? Do you see? And Paul, as he falls off and sort of catches himself as he looks up to the sky. Can you see that? I mean, is it too light in here to see? Because, again, with this kind of Baroque drama, there's this dramatic contrast of light. These May paintings, these Baroque paintings, are all about drama, and there's some drama around Jerusalem as well, as you might guess. So here we have St. Peter preaching in Jerusalem. It's not a quiet kind of moment, you see. This is not really a contemplative sermon. There's a lot happening all around him, and still he's managing to hold everyone's attention, yet notwithstanding the half-naked guy on his right-hand side, and the woman, and I guess, who's been nursing at his feet, and so on. For those of you who were with me in Jerusalem, do you notice anything about those columns? Those twisty columns? Remember we talked about how that happens a lot in Crusader sculpture because it's meant to be evocative of the Temple of Jerusalem, which is absolutely the way that it's being used here as well. There you go, you see? It's just like the Holy Fire. And another image of St. Paul. I had a lot that I could have chosen from of this series, but for this audience I chose two of the St. Paul, right? So there were, when you read about this series of the Mays, some of them were lost during the French Revolution. Some of them were destroyed in the French Revolution. Some of them were preserved but moved during the French Revolution. And this is a sentence from a recently published book on Notre Dame. Of the 76 Mays created, about 50 are still in existence. About 50, can't we have an exact count? Are you not sure where they are right now? And I think it's possible because they send them to different museums or different churches. And of course, everything is a bit chaotic at the moment with the church, with the cathedral closed. So again, another dramatic moment represented in these huge May paintings. There are other sources of paintings that are part of parcel of the cathedral. This Guido Reni painting, which is a beautiful image of Job receiving all of these extraordinary gifts. Well, it was in Italy. It was in Bologna, but Napoleon rather liked it, and so it was appropriated by him in 1796. So enriching the cathedral in the wake of the revolution. We'll talk about why that. We'll talk about that and how that was probably a good idea in a few minutes. While we're on the subject of painting and back to that stained glass painting, remember that we have the three medieval roses, then we have all the white glass until the 19th century when Viollet-le-Duc and Lassus undertake the restoration of the cathedral, and a huge campaign of reglazing begins, which results in the amazing harmony that you see when you are in the cathedral from this systematic campaign. And these are three images of some of that glass, which some of you may know I spoke about recently in the Wall Street Journal, because there's a campaign afoot to replace 6 of the 19th century glazing of this type with modern glass to be commissioned from as yet unnamed artists. They did a little of that in the 1940s after World War II, commissioned by Jacques Le Chevalier, whom you see here. He's very cute in his beret. He probably didn't wear a beret, because as far as I know, he wasn't really Breton or anything, but maybe that was a stage thing, I don't know. That's some of his glass that you see on the right-hand side. More of his glass. This being installed in the 1960s, you can just feel that kind of 1960s taste there. And it's that glass they've sent out to be restored at Cologne Cathedral. Now, if you want to really see, when you make your next trip to France, as much as possible of what comes from the Cathedral of Notre Dame, you're going to have to make a side trip to Poland. Because there are some fantastic, this is a painting that's in the Louvre. So you can just go as far as the Louvre to see this painting from about 1710. But you see the candlesticks at the altar? The candlesticks were there kind of by accident, because the candlesticks were commissioned by the Cardinal Archbishop of Poland for his church in Gniezno, but he died before the commission was complete. So for a period of time, from around 1705 when he died, until 1721, when it seems maybe somebody in Poland said, hey, what about that ensemble that was being made for us? They were in Notre Dame for a time. So you can have a sense of some of the richness at the time, of these slightly borrowed candlesticks in Notre Dame. And do you see behind him, behind the altar, in its placement at the time, the way that great Baroque ensemble, the vow of Louis XIII, was installed at that moment. There was an amazing tapestry ensemble at Notre Dame. They were ordered by Cardinal Richelieu to go along with the vow of Louis XIII. Originally, there were just 4 that were planned. Only the first 2 were completed before Richelieu himself died. But ultimately, there were 14 of them. And they represented scenes from the life of the Virgin. And such was the richness of Notre Dame that they couldn't, when they decided to make certain changes at the altar, they had suddenly no place for these 14 tapestries. So they're now in Strasbourg, but you have to go at Christmas time, which is when they're sewn at Strasbourg Cathedral. They're just magnificent, as you can see here. It's kind of funky nativity to me, but a great tapestry ensembles representing all the joyful scenes of the life of the Virgin. There you go. Lost altogether is this amazing figure of Saint Christopher, when Saint Christopher still was a thing, right? He was 28 feet tall, and it was created in the 15th century. So you see him here on the left side. It's because this is an engraving, it's flipped. It was the St. Christopher was on the right-hand side. And those are the May paintings overhead. Do you see that? They were destroyed in 1786 by accident because they were repairing the organ. So when you're working on your buildings, you got to be careful. They were hoisting something up to repair the organ, and it fell, and that was the end of the great St. Christopher. Now, why am I sharing it with you? If you can't see it, I'm going to share a couple things that you can't see because they don't exist anymore. But guess who saw it? Thomas Jefferson and John Adams would have seen this great St. Christopher when, on April 1st, 1785, a year before it was destroyed, they attended a great Te Deum ceremony at Notre Dame in thanksgiving for the birth of the Dauphin Prince to Louis XVI. So Jefferson went, Adams went with his whole family. Abigail was there, little Abby was there, John Quincy was there. They don't talk about this, although Abby in her so she was known as Nabby, she writes in her diary about how Notre Dame is the most beautiful building she has seen. Another thing that they conceivably saw, though it isn't recorded, is this amazing reliquary of the cross. You see that the cross was brought, the relic was brought to France from Jerusalem in 1109. And then this extraordinary gilded silver and bejeweled cross was created. You see it here in an image from the mid-15th century. And it's described still by an English visitor. Actually, he was resident in Paris for some time in 1758, and he said, "It contains a pretty considerable parcel, of our Lord's cross. It must have been an amazing work of art, and it was still there in the mid-18th century, as was the Châsse of Saint-Marcel. So this was a great reliquary, which you see here, both the Châsse of Saint-Marcel and the Châsse of Saint-Geneviève. The Châsse of Saint-Marcel was golden. It weighed 269 pounds of gold, silver, and jewels. And Saint-Marcel is like St. George in that he overcame a dragon. He's like Michael without the wings. And when they would have the procession of Saint-Marcel's feast, there would be they would make a straw dragon. And the straw dragon would be, which was representing the devil, the straw dragon would be at the front of the parade. And by the end of the parade, he would be sent to the back where he would then be burned. So it was a very dramatic event. All that kind of medieval and post-medieval good fun was replaced in a dramatic way during the French Revolution. The church was nationalized on the 2nd of November, 1789, and the Cathedral of Notre Dame, like churches and cathedrals across France, were changed into so-called temples of reason, where reason did not prevail at all. As you can see here, that's the figure of reason, a woman dressed up, or maybe it's a guy, who knows, and dressed up like a woman representing reason at the altar, on top of the altar, holding some kind of torch. And everybody's having a great time. There's a lot of revelry and probably a lot of drinking. And look what they're doing to all the objects from the church. And you can see them as they fall to the ground, right? There are the great gospel books. There's a chalice in midair. There's a candlestick being carried over somebody's shoulder. Another great processional cross being dragged across. The astounding destruction of their heritage. You can't read it and feel good anymore about celebrating the 14th of July. You just can't. So if you celebrate Bastille Day, I warn you away from, you can maybe leave because you're going to feel differently. In August of 1792, the liturgical objects from Notre Dame Cathedral disappeared overnight. Everything was appropriated for the benefit of the state. Right, because that's the thing with gold and silver, right? You can convert it into ready cash. So what survived? Well, some of what survived was the stuff that couldn't be easily converted, the magnificent statuary. So this amazing figure of Adam. And for those of you who are going to Paris before December, what you need to do, since you won't be able to get into the cathedral yet, is to go to the Musée de Cluny in Paris, where you will see this extraordinary Adam. Eve is gone. Nobody knows what happened to Eve. He was on the interior of the south transept, so that has something to do with his relatively good condition. It's an extraordinary, you don't think of the medieval period as a time of the great nudes. Well, guess what? That's not necessarily the case. So there was a problem with the facade of Notre Dame, and that is this lineup. There was a lineup of 28 kings across that ribbon in the middle. This from the Courtauld Library, the Conway Library at the Courtauld. This shows the kings after they've been brought down. Why? It was right around the same time that Marie Antoinette was guillotined. There was a decision made. We're actually going to destroy the images of the kings from the facade of the cathedral, and they were decapitated, and all the statues came down. I was taught in graduate school that the revolutionaries were wrong, that actually these represented the biblical kings of Judah. It didn't represent the kings of France at all. But more recent scholarship has unearthed a 13th century account of some kind of country bumpkins coming to the city of Paris, and they're looking up and trying to figure out which king is which, i.e. kings of France. Is that Charlemagne? Is that Pepin? Is that whoever? And that was the perfect moment when the pickpockets would steal their money. And this is from an account at the time. There was also a list fixed to the door, I think also in the 13th century, that said which king was which French king was which. And the kings of France, after being crowned, after their coronation at Reims, would be brought to Paris, and they would get the blessing of the Bishop of Paris right there at that very spot. So probably the revolutionaries were right in what they were right. I mean, they were correct in their identification, wrong in their decision to what they did. The originals were lost. Viollet-le-Duc ordered replacements from in the mid-19th century. And you see they're halfway through the job here, right? They've been lining them up. They haven't quite finished filling in all the niches. And that was sort of it, right? That's what we had to go on. However, in 1977, a French bank at this location was changing up its air conditioning and heating system. And as they did that, and they dug a trench, lo and behold, they unearthed these figures of kings. They see that head there, right? Can you imagine digging in your backyard and this is a very unfair thing. You know, that can't happen here. We will never unearth a 13th century French head in any city of the United States. So this makes it, being a curator in Paris, you know, you just never know. And so all of these heads, which had been decapitated, and many of these bodies are now in the Musée de Cluny in Paris. It is a great treasure. So until the December 8th, this is where you have to see the great work from Notre Dame. Or, if you don't have plans to go to Paris right away, here's another one that got away, and he's at the Met. He followed a different path. He was forcibly removed, just like the others in 1793, but somehow entered into different collections and ended up in New York. 1831 is another round of destruction. Look at these people. Okay, this is the same moment that Delacroix paints that amazing France on the barricades that we all love, right? She's got the tricolor and she's, leading the people to victory. But this is what was going on in the streets, right? They're hurling things out of the windows. They're hurling out chairs, windows, desks, and works of art. It's awful, this poor dear. So she was created in 1826. 5 years later, they throw her into the Seine, right out those windows that we were just looking at. And she's finally restored 25 years later and still existing. So theoretically, we'll be able to see her when the cathedral reopens. I've talked about the destruction at the French Revolution. I've talked about the destruction in 1831. I've just talked about destruction before the Revolution in terms of the glass. Things slipped away. And another dramatic example of that is a piece that slipped away during one of the great fairs at Saint-Germain-des-Prés. These were international fairs that became like today's international art fairs, but more so. And royalty and aristocrats, everybody went to this great fair in and around Saint-Germain-des-Prés. And this then, strangely, brings all of you closer to home, because at the Foire Saint-Germain, in 1619, this piece was offered for sale. And it was purchased by PPR, Peter Paul Rubens. Peter Paul Rubens purchased it in 1619. It has a gold rim. The gold rim is from the early 19th century because it has a mark on it. The vase itself is Byzantine, an incredible carving that came west. We don't know exactly when. The tendency is to think that it came west maybe at the time of the Fourth Crusade. It isn't clear, but it then entered French royal collections. It belonged to Charles V of France, and then it was given by Charles VI and his wife Isabella of Bavaria to the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and somehow slipped away from Notre Dame and was offered at the fair, not immediately thereafter, right? There's a few intermediate steps, but that's where Rubens sees it. and buys it because it's such a magnificent piece. So he buys it directly at the fair. It has then a long and complicated history that follows. Look at the sides with these masks of Pan. And this was one of his great prized possessions, as you can imagine. And today, one of the great masterpieces in the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, which says to me that you can begin your pilgrimage to Notre Dame in Baltimore anytime soon. In any event, once you get to Paris, the view will be magnificent, probably not as dramatic as this guy's, but that's it. I'd be happy to answer some quick questions. You have just a couple minutes. Thank you.